3. Sultanbek Khojanov's political activity in Turkestan. In difficult conditions of economic and social situations in Turkestan, there were crucial problems to solve, such as the development of national education and indigenous land management. It is in these areas that from 1921 to 1924, Khojanov took the lead of an activity at first at the Commissariat for Education and then at the Commissariat for Agriculture. It is interesting that the written reference to the Central Committee of the Communist Party of Turkestan in November 1922 describes Sultanbek Khojanov as a person who is not well grounded in theory with narrow-minded views regarding the national question. He grew up under influence of complicated conditions of Kyrgyz Kazakh nomadic life. He is a political demagogue, playing on the Kyrgyz people's tribal feelings. It is better to use him in print, in the editing of the Kyrgyz press. Thus, it's clear that Khojanov was not a dedicated Bolshevik but a nationalist. We mention this fact because even though the Central Committee of the Communist Party of Turkestan condemned Khojanov, it still let him take over the commissariats, which were the most problematic and the most decisive in solving problems of indigenous people of Turkestan. It should be pointed out that they did not work in an established country with its own history, but in a completely new one where they were the creators. That is why these conditions required self-confident political figures that were able to take the initiative in their hands. Khojanov was one of those politicians who, following the directives of the party, brought in those adjustments which addressed the specifics of the republic. Sultanbek Khojanov, being a teacher, was familiar with the deplorable state of the education system of Turkestan. Thus, in order to combat illiteracy of the local population, many schools were built in post-revolutionary Turkestan, but they were not backed with appropriate facilities. The People's Commissariat for Education, under the leadership of Sultanbek Khojanov, presented a program of public education at the 11th Congress of Soviets of Turkestan in December 1922. This program made provisions for a number of reductions of administrative staff of the commissariat. In most areas, it was necessary to register public education institutions once again, find out their condition, and clarify the need of school buildings and teachers. Taking into account the major need of the native population in education, he insisted that Congress must express its authoritative decision of the provision of enhanced state percentage of the state budget for educational needs. In the bulletin of the 11th All-Turkestan Congress of Soviets in 1922. The course on full reduction of the national and local administrative staff of the commissariat was carried out by the board of the People's Commissariat for Education. Delegates of the 9th Congress of Soviets took into account the scarcity of financial support and an acute shortage of teaching staff and approved the course. They also approved the establishment of a mandatory network of educational institutions of all grades, allocated depending on the state and local budget funds, the increase of allocations for public education to be from 14 to 20% of the total budget of Turkestan. Sultanbek Khojanov kept insisting on the increase of Turkestan's budget for education of indigenous people at the 9th All-Russian Congress of Soviets in Moscow in 1921. At this congress, during the break, Sultanbek Khojanov met Vladimir Lenin, who called him the hot-tempered Kyrgyz/Kazakh for his performance on questions of education of indigenous people of Turkestan. Sultanbek Khojanov's fruitful activity in the National Commissariat of Education was stated in the document under the name Job Evaluation. Khojanov on the position of the National Commissariat of Education of the Republic of Turkestan. Comrade Khojanov has been working at this position since October 1921. He has been its actual leader for the entire period of his career. He has great energy and initiative, combines work in his department with the general objectives of the state, has an exceptional ability to select employees and executives, and he is persistent in carrying out the planned tasks. He is indispensable for the People's Commissariat for Education in Turkestan's conditions. Apart from his primary job, Khojanov holds the post of People's Commissary for Agriculture, where he showed himself as a good leader as well, as the one who knows the conditions of Turkestan. From what has been said, apart from the Commissariat for Education, Khojanov was concurrently in control for the Commissariat for Agriculture, which was no less complicated at that time considering the economic and social life of the society of Turkestan. Poor development of capitalism and the maintenance of feudal patriarchal relations in agriculture determined the specific character and rate of the revolutionary agrarian transformations, which were slower than those of Central Russia. In 1918, only the land of the Tsar's family, officials, the wealthiest base, and individual agricultural and industrial capitalist associations was confiscated. But the foundation of colonial Russia and the Republic was still strong. Native people were still not involved in the construction of the new society. The unresolved problem of landlessness in the Soviet East made the conflict situation worse. This was facilitated not only by historical factors, but also by the fact that during the period of anarchy in the 1920s, Russian land ownership in Kazakhstan increased even more. In 1918 to 1922, when devastation and famine struck the country, a stream of impoverished landless peasants flooded Central Asia. Since the new government announced the slogan, "Land to the Peasants," it illegally seized available land. As a result, by the mid-20s, the Slavic population, together with Germans, amounted to more than 2.2 million people in Kazakhstan. The complication of the situation in the East was also caused by the fact that after the victory of the October Revolution, the majority of Kazakh refugees in 1916 returned to Semirechye from China in 1920 to 1920. Hoping to regain lost land, but the wealthy Cossacks and kulaks did not give up their position in impending return of the land, livestock, and the looted property. That is why the next major step of the agrarian reform was the land reform of 1921 to 1922, which was carried out on the basis of the resolution of the Central Committee of the RKPB, dated July 29, 1920, and the decision of the 5th Congress of the Communist Party of Turkestan and the 9th All-Turkestan Congress of Soviets. The main aim of the reform was to give the local and Russian peasantry equal rights to land. Lands which had been seized by Russian kulak settlers were handed over to the native population. The land reform was carried out in the main areas of colonization in the Turkestan ASSR. Semirechyensk, a number of countries of the Sirdarya and the Fergana region. It should be noted that the reform and the preparation for it were carried out in accordance with the Soviet laws under very controversial circumstances. The arrangements for the reform, which were necessary in 1921, were to be completed before spring fieldwork. That's why there was an extreme lack of time. Besides, there was a serious lack of land surveyors, and those who were there were all Russian, who did not wish to participate in the land reform. All these difficulties explain why the land reform implemented by the party has been later criticized. However, in the eyes of the middle-level local people, justice was served. Thus, according to the results of the commission which implemented the land and water reform and which was guided by the instructions of the People's Commissariat for Agriculture of Turkestan, 161 Russian villages and 175 farms, 95 winter huts and 45 separate occupied territories were destroyed in Semirechye. Of these, 8,084 farmsteads were evicted and 232,891 desyatinas of land were seized. But the reform was not carried through. As mentioned above, the Russian peasantry, being essentially the colonizers, did not want to give the land back to the local people of the region. The complaints from Semirechyensk Cossacks and peasants started coming to the center immediately. There were particularly many people displeased with measures taken by Sultanbek Khojanov, who was in charge of land reform. On the basis of these complaints, the conclusion was drawn that there were some mistakes made while carrying out the reform. In order to calm the nascent national enmity between the settlers and native populations, the center started adopting directives on the interruption of the reform process. The land reform in Semirechye received publicity that even Stalin had to intervene. On his behalf, the Asian Bureau received a telegram with the following contents. About 2 weeks ago, the Central Committee of the RKPB, while satisfying the request of the Asian Bureau and the member of the Central Committee Rudzutak, in a special telegram ordered the Khojanov's commission to immediately stop evictions in Semirechye. Today, Rudzutak's telegram has arrived, which states, even though Khojanov was summoned to Tashkent 3 times, he refused to leave Semirechye under various excuses and continues with the evictions. The Central Committee of the RKPB orders the Asian Bureau of the Central Committee to take all measures for immediate cessation of the evictions in Semirechye and prosecute the guilty for violating the directive of the party. The Central Committee of the RKPB orders the Asian Bureau to summon Khojanov and send him to Moscow for an explanation. The measures taken and Khojanov's departure should be reported to the Central Committee. After that, Sultanbek Khojanov's commission was withdrawn from Semeriche under an excuse that international principles in national policy of the party have been violated.